welcome to OnWard and Happy New Year, by the way. I know it's a little late in the month, but I haven't seen you all in a while. So I want to wish you all a Happy New Year. It's a little rainy outside, but that's okay. We've got a lot of sunshine going on here. I have with me today my amazing sisters, Paula and Marvina, and I have an awesome guest who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, Bec Cranford. But let me tell you a little bit about OnWard for those of you who are just joining us, never heard about us. And hi, Mom and Dad. Thanks for being constant viewers. But OnWard is about how we move on past the uncertain, the unwanted, and the unexpected things that happen to all of us. It's just real conversations about it. People who've experienced things who are willing to share, and hopefully some things that you can learn to help you to navigate life. You're listening to OnWard on the WCEG Network and WCEG Talk Radio. You can find us on Facebook, Insta, and LinkedIn at WCEG Talk Radio. You can also listen to us and follow us on our YouTube channel at the WCEG Network. Finally, all opinions expressed here are the opinions of the host and guests, not of WCEG. And in case you're wondering, WCEG stands for the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group. We speak life into the community. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? What we're going to talk about is real talk. You know, a lot of times things are said to us, and it could just be that slight comment that keeps us thinking and overthinking all day, all week, all month. It does something to our soul. You know, yesterday I was working out. I went to the gym and I was walking, and it was Friday. So there's a certain way that you walk when you're on the loop inside the gym. You know, they alternate days. And there's a person who was actually walking the opposite way. And so I said to him, I said, "Oh, hey, did you know that you're actually supposed to be going in this direction?" And he looked at me and scowled and actually cussed me out because I said to him, "Hey, you know, just trying to help out, get you to go the right way." And it sat with me the whole time I was working out. It kind of messed up my workout, to be honest. And I was thinking, why? Why would somebody be so rude when all I'm trying to do is be helpful? But really, I thought about it later and I said, why did that comment even impact me? You know, I was still able to work out, still able to have a good time. And I knew that I had to kind of sit back and not let that little interaction ruin my day. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Is not letting things ruin our day, but also how we talk to ourselves in situations. You know, sometimes we can be our worst critics and we can have the worst conversations with ourselves. So let me bring on our guests. I want to start first with Bec. Bec Cranford is a powerhouse in the homelessness space and really working with people. I've known Bec through the work that she has done. She's now with PAD, and PAD, Bec stands for PAD.
Policing Alternatives.
It's okay because I forget. But Bec was with Gateway for a long time, one of the largest homeless services providers in Atlanta. But really, Bec's real loves include speaking, writing, and teaching people, and really teaching more about how we encourage ourselves, uplift ourselves. On top of that, Bec has been a guest lecturer and has tutored many years at different colleges, universities, and churches. I love this, planted the Church of the Misfits, the first dually affiliated Disciples of Christ and United Church of Christ LGBTQ affirming church in West Georgia, which, Bec, we're going to have to talk about that, West Georgia. Bec cares deeply about society and especially those who are rejected. And I think that's why this conversation is so important. because a lot of people who feel rejected feel that way because of things that have been said to them about who they are and have caused them to really shut down and have bad feelings and thoughts about themselves. She has served at the Candler School of Theology since 2015. And she currently serves as a community responder at PAD, and in her spare time enjoys getting messy with acrylics and with her 5-year-old. Thank you, Bec, for being on. I want to start with you, really, because I want to talk about what it is about being with people who feel rejected and why that inspires you, especially as we're talking about conversations, being authentic in how we communicate with each other, because a lot of people who are rejected a lot of times shut down. They don't feel that they can really be their authentic selves. So talk about what brought you to this point and why you want to work with people who are feeling that way, who are feeling rejected and not a part of community.
Yeah, so I think it really boils down to me identifying with those that have been somehow pushed to the margins, because my story has become my work. So and I think my hurts have become my helps, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so I want to I want to love those people, and show them. Actually, I want to remind them of who they are.
Yeah, and so in reminding people of who they are, a lot of times, and we talk about this, especially my sisters and I, a lot about people not listening, right? When people are rejected, sometimes they're crying out for help, but we're not listening. Is that what you've experienced?
Many times, specifically, sometimes for those of us that are in like helping professions, sometimes we want to get to the fixing point or the next step. And sometimes people are just looking to vent and to be heard, to be seen.
Right,
And have a little bit of human moment instead of, being at the DMV.
right.
So yes.
And so you talked about how it's actually your own experience that brought you to this point. How did you experience life to the point where there was a time when you felt rejected?
For sure. So, as I I grew up in West Georgia, and there was a lot of taxidermy and camouflage. And sort of in rural West Georgia, there was also a lot of religiosity, like a very closed-minded set of like King James only type of religion that I grew up in. It was very closed-minded religion. And there was just certain expectations of people, especially like gender, especially women, especially how they, women took care of men, and you just did that. And the best that you could hope for as a woman would maybe to be a nurse, maybe to be a teacher, and those were like your two like options. And that never sat well with me. I did not like that. I used to get mad that boys got to run around with their shirt off, and we didn't. I mean, it was ridiculous. So that was the first really type of marginalization I received, was that as a woman. And then noticing sometimes in school, like a little bit of classism, because I grew up probably lower middle class, what I'd really consider like on the fringe. Like my parents were always really trying to be middle class. And just growing up with that and that sort of discrimination. And then realizing early on that I had some mental health differences, and being a very
Mm,
sensitive child, and trying to navigate that world. And
right.
then just I was always a tomboy. So getting the jokes about being like a lesbian, and people would say I was a dyke and things of that nature in West Georgia. And I just didn't wear a lot of camouflage. So I just didn't fit in. And I understood as a child early on like what it's like to be rejected and to feel sad and to feel like no one loved me.
No, and I appreciate you sharing that, because the thing that kind of stood out for me as you were telling your story is the things that people said to you. And in growing up, I remember sometimes I would talk to my mom about things that kids would say to me that would hurt me. And, parents would always say the whole sticks and stones thing, right? But words do really stay with you for a long time. You begin to develop your identity based on the words that are said to you. Paula, I want to go to you because of the work that you do where you're helping people to learn how to communicate. Sometimes you hear those stories that block us from being authentic communicators because of how we identify based on things that have been said about us or to us. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Bec, for sharing those words, because that does influence us throughout our lives. It's very difficult for us to move past those things. And as women in communication and business, a lot of times the way we communicate has been shaped by what we've been told we should do, what we should be. As minorities as well, oftentimes that's a big influence. So what we have been said, those narratives absolutely get in the way of us stepping more into what we can be as communicators.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you said that because what words do to us is not only shape us, but it can limit our potential. And I know, Marvina, we talk about our personal stories, but you have been on this amazing ongoing journey in your life, realizing that things that have been said in the past, while they've been hurtful, you've been able to move beyond it. What are some of the things that you've done in your life to kind of get beyond not only the talk that comes from the outside, but the self-talk that we begin to have?
I appreciate that. Thank you, Adrianne. So, even at a young age, just a lot of teasing, that went on with me, from being underweight to wearing big glasses and things of that nature. So I learned back in elementary school how to run away. And it was literally, I became a runner because that would allow me to get away from everyone and be with myself. And I was able to learn at that point in time how to like navigate my thoughts and speak to myself more from a winning standpoint, which was easy to do when I was out in the woods and I'm just by myself. But then once I was immersed back into the setting of, classmates or whomever wanted to bully me, then it's like, okay, those thoughts are coming back. So I had to consistently find ways to get away from it. And so it went from me being, using running or reading. I would really get into books and become those characters, to, as an adult, as you all know, with my sobriety journey, using alcohol as a way to run away and kind of not deal with those things. So it's only once I started my sobriety journey and really was able to do that self-work and get down deep to, like, what is the root of this? Why am I feeling the need to escape from who God created me to be? That I was really able to start embracing my authentic self. And that's where today it's just like, you know what? Yes, I'm quirky. I can be wacky. And I love it. I love me. And I'm 50 years old now. And it's taken, to this point in my journey. But I'm just so super grateful for the conversations that I'm able to have with my sisters, for the people that God has placed in my life, to allow me that it's okay to be who I am and accept who I am.
Yeah, I love that part about being who you are. And I know one of the things that tends to happen when we have a lot of negative self-talk, you talk about escapism, right? So a lot of people think about alcohol, drugs, but social media is
Oh, yeah.
escapism.
Mhm.
And what tends to happen with social media is we start seeing the lives of others and we compare. And we think to ourselves, oh, my life isn't like his life or her life. And I want to talk a little bit about that, especially when it comes to women and young people, and how we get lost, because one of the things that we're afraid of in our lives is silence, because silence forces us to be with our thoughts and to really peel back the layers of that negative self-talk. Bec, I want to get to you on this. because I know that in the community, you're dealing with a lot of people who have a lot of negative self-talk going on. And there's a lot of escapism. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the community, especially for people who are dealing with homelessness and feeling rejection? What are some of the ways that you're seeing people escape, and what are some of the tools that you're using to help them to come out and to start on a journey of thinking positive about themselves?
Yeah, so I think for so many of them, they're very disconnected from their
Mm.
body. And what I mean by that is they tend to spend most of their time in their head or
Mm.
in their thoughts and not really like listening to their body and their body's needs. Um, Also, they're trying to cope as best to regulate their central nervous system, which is a lot of them have been impacted by abuse and trauma and may have PTSD, and they cope in the ways that they've learned to cope. If they had a blanket as a child that helped them get to sleep and feel safe, that's what they go to. If that happened to be acting out sexually in a way that could be harmful to them or others, but it brought them some sort of serotonin and dopamine, then that's where they go. If it's alcohol, if it's, crack cocaine, if it's heroin, these are the places that they go to find safety. So I definitely believe in harm reduction. Like, we know that people are going to be involved in risky behavior for a while until their, kind of their thoughts start to change. So making that risky behavior as safe as possible, definitely believe in that. But also, like when I'm working with people and I get the chance to be with them, I like to try to get them to get back into their body, like with breath work and like sensing what's going on
Yes.
and like where the feelings are at. Like, is that in your stomach? Is that in your shoulders? Like, is that tension? Like, we're pulling all these muscles up here. Like, so try to get them to listen to their body. And then another thing is just like positive self-talk. Like, my body is good. Like, my body, a lot of people don't think, especially if they were raised with religion, they think that their body is evil. So like talking about like my body is holy. My body is good. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm a good person, and getting people to like just kind of say those sort of things and just affirmations, and then just even some tapping, and some central nervous vagus nerve release techniques. That's something that I try to do with our friends who are experiencing homelessness, to try to get them to start to regulate their emotions and their very real and sometimes big feelings.
No, I appreciate that, because that's exactly what happens when you escape using alcohol or drugs or social media or anything where you are outside of yourself. You lose contact with yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, and all the things that you're feeling, you're not able to be in touch with. And it's scary. The thing of it is for people who are experiencing homelessness, you can see the impact of it. For those of us who are just walking around looking the way we do every day, it's hidden. And so, Paula, I want to get back to you, because one of the things that you've been working on, and I love this, is the impact of listening. Because not only are we not listening to each other, we're always thinking about, what am I going to say in response to what you just said? But we're not listening to ourselves. And as Bec said so powerfully, we're not even listening to our bodies. Talk about a little bit what really listening means, because it's not something that we do easily.
Yeah, and again, I have to say thank you to Bec. I just feel like there's so much alignment in what she's saying with what we talk about around communication and this whole idea of connecting with the body is such a critical part of listening, because our body is telling us when we're not listening. It is speaking to us, but we ignore it because, as she said, we're so in our heads. And I really think that this is heavily influenced by Western culture. We live in a culture that is all about, I really think, outward focus
Yes.
and appearance, as opposed to self-reflection. And if we're really going to listen to people, and listen to ourselves, we have to make some space for that. Whether that's physical space through our breathing and releasing tension in the body that blocks that ability, or whether it's letting go of some of our mental attachments that just keep us from opening up the opportunity to receive what somebody else has said. Doesn't mean we've got to like it, doesn't mean we've got to agree with it, but just the act of receiving is not something that we do. And to me, it's a part of really self-care, receiving what is out there for us. So that's a big focus of what I'm doing in terms of helping people to grow in the space of listening.
No, and I love that, and one of the things that I think is really important before we even step to the listening is developing an awareness of our own triggers. Because a lot of times people will say things to us and we have this immediate response, this immediate physical response or emotional response, and we think it's them, but it's something that has been triggered within us that then stops us from listening because we're going to shut them out, tune them out, rather than taking a step back and being aware of what just happened within me that caused me to have this visceral reaction. Marvina, talk a little bit about that, because and I mean, actually we all can, but I'm just making sure we all get time here. But Marvina, talk about experiences that you've had where, and Bec too, where things have been said and it's a small thing, but it triggers in you this response that really shuts you down and stops you from listening and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had quite a few instances I can talk about, but I'll just kind of go back to the whole feeling, the emotions. I can literally feel in my stomach, or as Bec was saying, like in my shoulders, when someone says something that's really impacting me in a negative way. I feel that. And so, whether it's from being in a relationship that was emotionally and verbally abusive, there was a lot of that happened. So still continuing to have triggers, even though that was a long time ago. Like if someone says something that takes me back to that place, then all of a sudden I want to be very reactive, and I go into defense mode. Like, okay, nope, this is a boundary. You're not going to talk to me like that, instead of pausing. And that's where just recently I had a circumstance where I was having a conversation with someone and took a left turn really quickly. And some of the things that were being said to me really made me feel bad about myself. Momentarily, I had to catch myself. And so instead of my typical response of wanting to, react, defend myself, you're not going to talk to me that way, I paused. I had that moment of pause, and that's where it's such a great idea. Like Adrianne and Paula, we did a study on emotions, and that's where it's just really important to have put that work in, especially with God, and put him at the center in the forefront. Because what I did instead of react is I paused and then I took it to God, instead of taking it to my sisters or taking it to somebody else who wouldn't be able to help me resolve the issue. But I took it to God and I really sat with it. And I said, you know what? Let me assess what just happened and why it happened, and why it impacted me the way it did, and what might be going on with this other person for them to come at me the way they did.
Right.
And when I tell you it changed the whole outcome, like what happened on the back end of that was what I would describe as miraculous, with how this particular person and I typically interact. It was just incredible. So just being able to learn how to sit, be still, pray about it, it's huge. It's life-changing. It's a game changer.
Yeah, I love that whole concept of pause, because you're right. A lot of times we react immediately. And Bec, I know for you, talking about your own experiences, how have you worked through dealing with triggers when things are said either to you or about you? Because things are always said about us or to us, but how do you navigate through triggers in your life?
Yeah. So, I continue to grow and continue to walk in this journey, and just had a pretty visceral experience this week. And I was reflecting with my therapist about it. And she said, well, why do you feel like I was having some physical responses as a person was cursing me out? And it wasn't, I can have people on the street cuss me out all day long. And I'm like, okay, God bless you. Have a great day.
Yeah.
But it was someone a little bit closer. And I could begin to feel my body having like a little bit of a panic attack, heart palpitations. I could feel heat coming up. Like I was feeling all these physical responses. And I remember just sort of almost like kind of tuning out. Like it was like my body's way of like trying to get out of the situation. And as I was reflecting with my therapist about it, she was talking about like this is definitely something that we do, especially those of us who have been in traumatic situations before. Like our body is trying to keep us safe. Our mind will try to keep us safe. And so we talked about it, and I remember thinking, like, why did this particular situation set me off? Like, what was my trigger? And I've had to do a lot of work on myself and go back to my childhood. And that's been really hard because a lot of us who are professional women, we're working 50, 60 hours a week, and we're pumping out and we're hustling and we're vibing. And then it's like, whoa, no, I got to go back again. And I got to keep going back and keep walking in this healing process to learn more about like what my triggers are. These days, I think I know what all my triggers are, and I'm able to just pause and wait. But sometimes I do have to say, "Can you give me 1 second?" Or just,
Mhm.
when someone
Yeah.
is going on, just so I can kind of regulate my physiological stuff before that becomes overwhelming. Thanks, Adrian.
No, I love what you just said, especially about women and working, because a lot of women have children. They're working a lot of hours. Even if you don't have children, you're still working a lot of hours and you're trying to navigate all these relationships. And sometimes as women, we take on the burden of just carrying these emotions,
Mhm.
not realizing that when something is said to us, that's when we respond, and it's not always positive. Um, so I want to kind of take a little turn with the conversation and really talk about being a woman in Western culture and how we deal with emotion. Because a lot of times we are told to, just take our emotions and kind of stuff it and show and soldier on, especially in the workplace. And what it does to us is then when we come home, a lot of times we sit and we talked about how we use that as a time to escape rather than really sit with ourselves and heal. Paula, I want to talk to you because you see a lot of professional people in your environment, and you see the results of that where people are like, I got this. But then when you're coaching them through communication, you see the vulnerability coming out. Talk about how our inability to be authentic sometimes shows itself and how we operate even in a professional environment, in our inability to really communicate well, because that's what you're doing. You're trying to help people to be really vulnerable and authentic in how they communicate in a professional setting.
Hmm. It's complicated because, again, we are, as women, still working in a male dominated, a white male dominated world, and trying to navigate that being a woman. So dealing with these constant battling ideas of be assertive, but don't be too assertive. Be a woman, because women are sensitive and women bring a certain sense of vulnerability that men don't bring, but don't always bring that. So it's this constant, what am I supposed to be? Instead of, just being me, whatever that means. If I'm a little rough and tumble, okay, that's who I am. Don't ask me to be this soft, sensitive, woman. But if I'm the woman who tends to be a bit more vulnerable and caring, allow me to be that as well. One of the things that I really just try to talk to people about is that we're multifaceted, and don't put yourself in a bucket. Yes, you may be more of this very sensitive, caring type, but are there not opportunities for you to explore where being a bit more assertive is something that is available to you? It doesn't change who you are. So I really like for people to expand their view of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the final thing I'll say is, we have to have these conversations with men. They have to be had, that, if we're really going to open up opportunities for everyone, then don't have these expectations that they're going to be a certain way, or that your view of them is always the single view.
So I love something that you said, and you talked about how what tends to happen is we don't feel comfortable being ourselves. If we're very sensitive, we try to shift to being a little more assertive and hard, and I've got this. If we are a little rough and tumble, then we try to shift to be a little more soft, and more approachable, rather than really being who we are and feeling comfortable with it, and walking through that walk in life, because God created us to be who we are for a reason. Oh yeah, and here's another one: not wanting to be considered to be extra. Right?
Yes, don't bring all the drama.
Yeah, don't be extra. And so for the three of you, I want to talk through what are ways that, as we've been on our own individual healing journeys, and as other women are listening, how do we begin to have authentic conversations first with ourselves, acknowledging who we are, feeling comfortable with who we are, being willing to make adjustments where needed, and then have those authentic conversations with others, which is really hard because sometimes we anticipate negative coming back at us, and we don't want to deal with that. So let's first talk about the authentic conversations within ourselves, and then we'll shift to having those authentic conversations with others. How do you do that? How do you get all that negative stuff that's in your head and turn it into positive self-talk? And I'm opening it up for anybody.
Well, I'll say it's daily. It's a daily journey. First and foremost, it is something that I have to work on constantly. Mm-hmm. And it also evolves, because what that negative self-talk was 10 years ago is very different than today. And I fully suspect it's going to change 5 years from now, 2 years from now, a year from now. So it's having the awareness that I'm evolving, and if anything is going to change in that realm for me, that I'm going to have to really examine myself to change, because it's not going to change without me changing.
Right. I love the whole thing about evolving, because we're different people in different times in our lives. Because Bec, I know you have a young child at this point, right? But the Bec who didn't have a child, I'm sure it's different than the Bec that has a young child. Talk a little bit about that and how you've seen yourself evolve.
Yeah. So having a child has definitely, changed a lot of the ways in which I which I operate, especially with a relationship with work. But I do recall when I was without a child, like work was like, that was my baby. That was my thing. That was my purpose. That was my life. That was like where I was drawing my energy from. And I even use work as an escape. I'll be
Mm,
honest. Sometimes
mhm.
it was easier
Yeah.
to work for a cause than it was to deal with my own hurts and woundings.
Yeah.
So I kind of escaped into work. Having a child, I really had to set a lot of boundaries, but also like, it made me realize that that I want her to be her authentic self and not to shut
Mm.
down and not to have to deal with the things that I've dealt with as a woman at work. And I can recall years ago being in an argument, a confrontation with a male coworker who just went ballistic on me. And the minute I started to tear up, he said, "Why are you getting emotional? Are you on your cycle?" And I was so mad. I was like, how dare him not restrain his emotions and then tell me that mine cannot be controlled because of physiology,
Right.
right? So that was
Right.
really just a very I wanted to strangle him. I really did. Like, I'm a pacifist, but there's a reason I'm a pacifist, because I would have went for the jugular. Like, such a jerk. But there's that hypocrisy in the work world where they say, well, women have to behave a certain way, but a man
Right.
can become angry.
Right.
And I think that's completely Western too. I want to tap here and just say that, like, in many of the two-thirds majority world, like, emotions are allowed to be expressed. I mean, there
Mm.
are some cultures that, are shame-based cultures or guilt-based cultures where you,
Yes.
you kind of keep those, but there's others that, they allow for things to be processed and they allow time. And just quickly, Adrian, I want to pivot and just say that women in the Hebrew, Near Eastern ancient culture, they were the ones that they called forth to start the grieving process for the people. They said, help the women come and help us wail. And it was the women that got into their bodies, got into their stomach, got into that part, that gut, and was able to bring this visceral pain up and out of the body and help the people
Mm.
grieve. And I think
That.
women can really be those sort of emotional doulas if we let them be.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I love that you brought that up because part of our strength is the ability to be emotional healers. And in our culture, that has been kind of reduced as a positive, as a strength, right? And I don't know, Marvina, if that's something that you have seen or experienced as well.
Yeah, I just want to, if I can, talk to the dealing with the negative self-talk, like
Mm-hmm.
personally. So just having to learn to be very honest and open with myself has been what's helped me. Journaling, like just getting it out of my head and getting it onto paper and processing that and dealing with it. We actually did an exercise at work that I thought was very powerful, where we all had to write down one negative thing that we tell ourselves. Like if we are
Huh.
asked to do something that we feel is outside of our knowledge base. And so we had to write it and we had to forward it along. We didn't have to put our name on it. And then when we all met as a group, they had a group of us come up to the front and they gave one person, they alternated and gave someone a piece of paper. And so that person had to turn to the person beside them and read what was on the paper. And it
Mm.
was negative self-talk that someone else had said. And the way it was so hurtful to have to say those words out loud to someone else, and then to be the person receiving, like I was the receiver, and it was just like the way it made me feel and the way it triggered me. And then the girl who was saying it to me, she had like tears in her eyes. She's like, I don't want to say this, but to know that those are things that we sit and tell ourselves. And so that helped me going forward to say, like, these are things that I would say to someone I love. These aren't things I would say to my children or anyone I love. So what is that saying to me if I'm saying them to myself? Do I not love myself enough to be nice be kind to myself? Marvina,
Right.
you're worthy. You're a child of God. He created you in his image and his likeness, and you're amazing. So it's like when I am noticing myself kind of leaning towards negative self-talk, it's bringing myself back to remind myself who I am and what I am.
And I love that because it's interesting how, and Paula, you and I talked a little bit about this, how easy it is for us to go to the negative than to the positive. How easy it is for us to go to the destruction than to the healing. And it kind of tells you, I don't know about this, but a little bit of maybe how our brains are wired, that we move more towards the negative than the positive. Um, but if we're struggling, how do we, especially as women, move beyond this negative view of ourselves, negative self-talk, and start to have more authentic conversations? I want to know this because we can't do it by ourselves. I don't think you could just sit with yourself. I mean, you can learn it over time, but what are some of the ways that you individually have moved beyond negative self-talk to be able to start healing yourself? And then we're going to start talking about the positive conversations, authentic conversations we can have with others. But how did you start these conversations with yourself? These positive conversations?
Well, I agree with Marvina that I think journaling is huge. It's a way of getting things out. And I think we have to have a mechanism for doing that. And writing is a great tool for allowing us to release those ideas and those feelings. One of the things that I've had to work through is really allowing myself to not harbor jealousy. I think many times that gets in the way of us accessing our best self. And so I've really worked on celebrating myself and celebrating others as a way to help me work through that. Because like I said, I know that if I don't do that, then what I'm doing is I'm blocking the ability to really recognize my gifts and other people's gifts too.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. Yeah, because that's when we exhibit jealousy or envy, it's outward focused.
Mhm.
Yep.
It's all about you. It's not about a celebration of my own abilities and gifts. Marvina and Bec, how do you all, or how did you all begin the journey of positive self-talk, and being able to recognize within yourselves your positive attributes and to celebrate them?
I'll say, and I'm sure there was some along the way before this, but really putting myself into a 12-step program, helped me tremendously. Having an accountability partner through a sponsor, someone who really understood, it's one thing to talk to your family and your friends and all of that, but being able to talk to someone who can truly relate to what you may be dealing with is a completely different story, and it takes you down a different path on your journey. So just being able to recognize what I was needing, why I was needing that, that's what helped me. And then working through, like, recognizing I've got to put in some work here. It's not going to fall in my lap. It's going to be painful. It's going to be long, strenuous. But then I had to reflect on my other parts of my journey. I've been here before. I've run 5Ks and all of that. And so I know what it looks like to have to start a journey and go through the end, and it's going to be hard and painful. So it's like those things were already put within me because God knew what was coming down,
Right.
down my journey. So he's like, I need to build up your stamina because you're going to revisit this feeling again. It's not going to
Yes.
look like a physical race, but it's going to be very similar. And so when I reflect back just on things like that, how all of the different things we've experienced along our journey resurface, and then we're able to see how we handled it previously and how God helped us through that. That's been what's helped me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Marvina.
You're welcome.
And Bec, what about you?
Yeah, I think the healing journey for me always spirals back and keeps coming back to, things. I'll think, well, I've already healed from this, but then it's like, well, no, I need to maybe go back and do some more healing. I think my first major experience of like removing the lenses of rejection, I think was really when I did receive a pretty ultimate rejection of being kicked out of denomination because of my changing views on interpreting scripture and how that impacted loving other people. And I had a lot of white men from Texas and Louisiana calling me, an apostate and heretic and all this. And it was just really ugly. And I had longtime friends that I had prayed for and prayed with, tell me that I was a horrible person, that I had turned my back on God, just a lot of ugly. And in that sort of desolation and isolation, it got me to get real and authentic and nasty and snotty and on the ground with myself and with God. And finally, I was like, all right, I'm going to have to just depend on you, like not the likes, not the approval of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I may not be the poster girl that they wanted me to be. And I just have to move on from that. So while it was painful, I can tell you there's so much more freedom that I have now because I'm not reliant on those people liking me to get my own sense of worth.
Yeah.
That's
And
it. Yeah.
yes, yeah.
That's it. I love that. And that's it exactly. When you start healing, you're not relying on other people
Mm-hmm.
to boost you up and make you feel good about yourself.
Right.
And so, Bec, I know that you do workshops and a lot of teaching around helping people to heal through rejection. Talk a little bit about the work that you have done, are doing. And I especially love that you are bold enough to go into areas where you know that sometimes it may not be well received, but you're bold enough to say, hey, this is what we need to do to begin that process. Tell us a little bit about those authentic conversations you're helping people to have.
Yeah, so I like to lead authentic and kind of vulnerable workshops where people can get down um, and pull some things out and have moments to experience emotion, but also to really check in with their body. So I do love leading a lot of spiritual retreats for organizations, groups, and they don't have to be a particular religion or anything like that. I mean, these sort of higher modalities of healing, they don't necessarily pertain to one particular religion. They can be found in a multitude. So I enjoy using those healing modalities, really connecting with our body and being vulnerable. From the kind of, I guess you'd say, the Christian perspective, there's a scripture in Revelation that talks about that they overcame the world by the word of their testimony and by the sacrifice of the Lamb. And in that metaphor, that word of their testimony, that is their vulnerable storytelling. That's their vulnerable bringing up the pearls of wisdom that they've received from their life and how they've been able to walk through. And then that whole sacrificial lamb thing is like this otherworldly power, right, of humility and like kind of letting go. So that kind of kenosis that we find. So in those metaphors, I like to bring that to a group and I say, let's get down, let's get some healing, let's allow our bodies to do this. And I think in order to have those sort of authentic retreats, we do have to be vulnerable. And I think that leadership has to accept the example of vulnerability. I'm not saying that we share our current wounding and what we're currently going through. Like, that's not the place for that. Like you don't need to be my therapist when I come to talk to you. But like from our scars, right? So from the things that have been healed over, or was,
Yes.
a journey of healing that we've had over a lifetime, that's where we're able to pull from.
Right, right. And I love that. Because a lot of times people think when we're talking about authentic conversations or healing conversations that we're talking about, exposing current wounds and opening ourselves up to being even more wounded.
Mm.
That's not the point. The point is, one, having an awareness of what's going on inside of us. And Marvina, you talked about the pausing, not having those conversations sometimes in the moment,
Right.
walking away, wrestling with it, and then coming back, and then listening. Because a lot of times when we have conversations, it's a one-way conversation. It's us talking, and that's it. you're not really open to hearing what the other person is saying. And then back to your point, if people say something to us in a conversation and that wound is open again, how do you deal with that? How do you um, allow yourself to progress within a conversation, an authentic conversation, and not just shut down? How do you do that as you're healing, as you're trying to work through having a conversation with another person and expressing how you're feeling? How do you continue to have the conversation when you've been aware, you're listening, but they're still coming back and saying things that are wounding?
So I think there's a couple different things to do. And sometimes we can be very conflict avoidant and try to
Mm.
shut down and want to maintain peace instead of
Yes.
getting to like what's happening. And I think it depends on your level of relationship with that person, right? Like if it's a strong person that you've known for a long time and you know that you value one another, then there's an opportunity there to pause and say, I just want to tell you that there's some things that I am feeling, and maybe right now is not a great time for this conversation.
Mm.
That's okay. If it's with a stranger, I think it's also okay to just pause and say, may we revisit this at a scheduled time? And
Mm.
then say thank you for your patience. And that's it. Don't
I love
defend
that.
yourself. Don't share your emotions with that person.
Love
You don't
that.
know how much they value you. You don't know what the support is there, but you can stop and you can reschedule that conversation.
I
And
love
then
that.
at that time, you call the confident or you make that psychotherapy appointment.
Ooh, I like that.
I love that. I think that's so powerful because you do have the power to say that. You don't have to be powerless and live in a conflict situation that's continuing to wound you. And by the way, I am one to admit that I am conflict avoidant. I'm just one of those people that I want to try to keep the peace at all times, but then within myself, I have no peace, because I'm still carrying the burden of these feelings, and trying to figure out how to keep the peace. But I love that you said you can pause the conversation
Yeah.
and just say, "Hey, let's come back to this another time," and it allows you room.
I
I
love it too.
absolutely love
It's like
that.
we always feel like we have to address it right now. Like, okay, I need to get this addressed right now. It can't wait. And then we sit with it later. It's like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that. I wish I had given myself some time, So yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
I love that. And so, Bec, talk a little bit about, do you have anything coming up soon? Are there ways that people can get connected to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of little spiritual fun things I'm putting together for some groups. And then I'm also a spiritual director in training. So discount, everybody. If you're looking for a spiritual director, and that's just a person that asks you questions, I'm not there to like, I don't wave a wand over you or anything like that. But you can contact me at beccranford.com. That's just www.beccran, like cranberries, Ford, like Ford trucks.com. And I'd love to learn more about people that are on a process of journeying, healing. And I'm always down for conversations about God, whatever that means to you. And so thanks, Adrianne.
Okay, and so I'm sorry, you shared you shared, I don't know if it was a website or an email, but can you share that one more time? I'm going to
Yeah.
try to type it into chat so that it can get
Oh,
shared.
you're super kind. So the website is www.bec, that's BEC, Cranford, that's CRANFORD.com.
Okay, great. All right, so get that out. Yeah, that would be great because you certainly have some gems there. There's a question that came across, and I was trying to read it. When a person reacts to negativity in a negative way, is that an indication that they're out of balance with themselves? Anybody want to tackle that?
I would definitely say yes.
I agree. Though I would also say, is that an outward action, or is it a recognition that they're having some negative thoughts? You know what I mean? Because I think, again, going back to maybe culture or what have you, we don't give ourselves permission to process negative thoughts. I can be angry. I can be frustrated. It's okay to have those thoughts. It's how do I act on those thoughts?
Yeah.
I think that's a key thing. And we're getting short on time, but I do want to say this is that a lot of times we feel that our emotions are bad rather than focusing on the response. And it's getting back to what Bec said that I thought was so powerful. When you're in the middle of a conversation and you see it going left and you've done the self-awareness and the listening, if you, in a calm way, are able to escape or not escape, walk out of that conversation, pause, and just say, hey, I need some more time, it allows you to still feel that emotion. You can still be angry or mad or what have you, sad, but it allows you to deal with that emotion in a positive way rather than continuing the conversation and it escalating. Yeah. So I like the fact that we're dealing with our emotions, knowing that our emotions themselves are not the problem. It's how we deal with our emotions and the response that can cause trouble. Any last points before we end our show today? This was a quick one.
It was.
I know.
I'd like to remind everybody that's listening that they are divine, that they have the divine spark within them, that they are a child of God, that they
Yes.
are godlike, goddess-like, and that they should just rock on and love the world and shine their light.
Amen.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Love that, Bec. Love that. Marvina or Paula?
No, this was great.
Set
I
off.
know, right? I think that was a good ending. So, hey, we got a minute. Y'all, thank you for joining us today. And as I always end, gotta run.